Greetings everyone. So this is the video for SM Lab, which is the strength of materials. So this was a setup you guys were given. So you have the strain indicator over there. I think you guys have a picture of this in one of your slides. And then we have the actual equipment here. So what you see is the beam. You have a threaded rod. That's where you put your weights. And then we have got several strain gauges. So I'd recommend that you pull up your procedures whilst you're listening to this video so that you can follow along. So these have set colors. So the one at the top is black, and if you look at the diagram, then they have certain numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is what I've labeled them as. So in my set of equipment, number 1 is the black wires, number 2 is the red wires, and so forth, and so on and so forth. So the first section over here asks you guys to measure the rectangular beam, which is this beam over here. So because of the scale of this, you should be using a ruler because it's fairly long. So for this bit, I'm not going to give you the values because the data we've collected is different to that of this apparatus. So I'll just show you how you're meant to do it. So you'd use your ruler to measure the distance from this point, the end of the beam, to the edge and to the center of the thread rod. During our first lab, we did have a few questions as to where we should be measuring this from. So the answer to that is from this point here. The reason being, these two bolts over here are just meant to hold it down so that it's kept in place. Right, so when this thing is bent, we want movement to begin from this point here all the way to the edge. So you measure that, and then you can also take measurements of the edge to the center of the strain gauge. All the required data will be provided. So, and we've already set this up. So you're also given a dial over here. So this is meant to measure the deflection. So what you want to do is make sure it's straight with the rod, and just from the other direction as well. Once you've got it positioned and right on the rod, you have to zero this, right? So you rotate your outer ring so that your initial reading is 0. So this is the calibration side of things. I think I've already gone too far ahead. So now that this is sorted, we'll get that out of the way later again. But the measurements, you meant to measure these things, and then for the height or the width of this beam, you'd have to use a vernier caliper. The reason for that being is the thickness is so small that you'd increase your uncertainty by a lot using a ruler. So the way you want to do that is you first calibrate your verniers as well. Whenever you're using equipment, just make sure you calibrate everything. So the way you do that is by rotating this as well. So make sure it's 0, 0 by pushing it all the way in, and then you make sure it's 0 there, right? So once you've done that, you can pull it back and then do your usual measurements, right? And just make sure it's sitting flush, and you don't want to push it push it into the beam. So just make sure it's sitting flush, and then carefully remove it not to change that distance, right? So then you have your usual measurements where you take a reading of this side, and then you use the dial to figure out what your thickness is of the beam. Again, this will be given to you, so you don't need to worry about it, but this is just how you're expected to take that reading, right? So now that we've got the measurement side of things sorted, we've got the setup perfectly fine, we'll move on to the connection of the cables for the strain gauges. So these are our wires. So this does look a bit fancy, but the only thing is they're just extensions. So red is connected to red, white is connected to white. So this just gives us a bit of mobility with the wires and stuff. So nothing special there. Now coming to this board over here. So this was the strain gauge that you were provided, and these are the diagrams that you're meant to use. So the instructions say for channel 1 you'll be using a half bridge, and for channel 2 and channel 3 you'll be using a quarter bridge, right? So again, you can just follow these things or using your procedures, but if you pause the video and perhaps just have a look. So yeah, like from there on you can just follow along as to what I'm doing. So what you'll see is the half bridge is between the black and the red strain gauges, right? So just again go through your positions. This one is in position 1. I think red is in position 2 at the bottom, and those, you're using these 2 strain gauges as your half bridge. So if we look at this diagram over here, let's say for example the black one is on the left and the red one is on the right. What you see is one of the leads is connected to the other, right? So the center lead, like one of the leads for both of them are connected to each other. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to use one red, one black, and then we're just going to intertwine them, right? So this is just to make a connection. And then from there what you see is the other 2 remaining cables, which is one red, one black, has to go in P plus and P negative. So I'm going to do that here. When you're connecting these things, there's something to be careful of. You want the connections to be perfect, so make sure you push the wires in properly. So like that, just make sure all the way in and just drop it in, right? And then the black cable goes in there. This doesn't matter, so you could have the black or the red in there, but just make sure the other one is in the opposite one, right? So that's our half bridge completed. So you see the black wire going in from P plus to S minus, which you see on the diagram. So P plus to S minus, that's one completed, and the second one is going from S minus to P plus, right? S minus to P plus. Cool. So now we have to go get onto the quarter bridges. So now coming on to the second bit, which is making the 2 quarter bridges. So in this one we're using the white strain gauge and the green strain gauge. The white one goes to channel 2. So according to your procedures, again, if you have a look at them, it will tell you that it goes into channel 2. So coming back to this diagram here, so what we see is the 2 leads coming in have to go into the P plus and S minus, but then you see this third wire that's coming in from here, which is connecting to one of these 3. What a strain gauge is a change in resistance, right? So you're measuring the change in resistance to get your strain. So this value over here is the resistance of your strain gauge itself. And like if you look at the equipment that's given, it has a little note over here. So it has a little note over here which gives you all your values that you need, right? So it has the resistance over there at the bottom, and it says 350. So now that we know it's 350 ohms, the resistance, so we're going to connect the second wire onto 350. And now the thing is, we've only got 2 cables here. So the way to get around this is using a jumper. So what we're going to do is connect the first one to P plus, and then the second one, according to the diagram, goes into S minus. But we need to connect a jump lead over here. So I'm going to insert one end with the S minus cable, just like that, and drop that, and then this goes into 350 because that's our resistance. Right, so that looks good. And then we're going to repeat the same one for the green strain gauge. Alright, cool. So now we have the green leads connected just like the white one. So we've got a jumper cable running from S negative to the resistance, the desired resistance of 350. And now we're going to connect this system to the PC. So everyone was provided a USB cable. So you just plug that into your PC. And what you'll see is the strain gauge starts up. So now it's running. Now the problem is no one wants to use the screen, right? So thankfully we can use a software that is provided by the manufacturers. So the way of getting to that is on your start menu, all programs. The manufacturer is, that's the name. And you can just open the Module 3 software. So what you see here is an exact overlay of what the actual setup is. Right, so here you've got your strain gauge values in microstrain. You can see the micro over there sign, and yeah, we'll just configure this now. So now we're just going to follow a few procedures that were outlined in the procedures file itself. So just feel free to follow along what I'm doing using your procedures. Obviously that's on the side. So the first thing we're going to do is use the channel button, which is over here, and we're going to set out which channels we're using. So we've used the first 3 channels, so we're going to turn channel 4 off, right? Just press OK, and that means the screen shows that it's off now. The second one is to set the proper bridge for each channel, and this is done using the bridge setting over here. So the first one was a half bridge with equal and opposite strain, right? And the second one is a quarter bridge and a quarter bridge. So now we have that setup. Now we need to set the gauge factor, and this is done using the scaling. And these values again, these values are given. So that's the GF value over there. That's 2.01. So yeah, we'll just change these values to 0.1 and 0.1 and press OK. So now that step is done, and now we're just going to use the balance button. This is essentially like a tare when you're using your regular scale, like weighing scale. You know, like if the values are off, then you just want to zero everything. So you can use this 0 over here, and that will make everything 0 because we haven't essentially loaded the system. So this should be our new reference point. So now that it's zeroed, all 3 of the strain gauges are reading 0. This is the part where you would verify with us whether your setup is correct. So what you're expecting is when you push down on the strain gauges over here, you should have a positive reading on the first channel and negative readings on the second and third channel. Right, so I'm just pushing down, and there you go. The first one goes on positive, second and third one goes on negative. Right, so now that that is sorted, it looks like the equipment is working. Now just before we start the procedures again, we just want to verify that this is 0. So the deflection should still be at 0. And again, I made a mistake by jumping around from the measurement to setting this up. So again, just make sure that that's 0. And then from there, we'll just measure our weights, and then we just meant to load it onto the system. So this is our first weight, and these would be our first readings. So channel 1, channel 2 and channel 3, just record those values and remember that they are micro strain values. And then from there on, we would go on to add 8 more weights to get 8 more sets of data, and then we should have a set of data for this, right? So that's pretty much it. All this data will be provided. So what you will be provided is dimensions of the equipment and the weight of everything, and then just all the channel values. So just another thing from the first weight that was added, you would use this dial to figure out how much deflection, which means how much this beam has moved, right? So again, these values will be provided as well, the deflection values. So that's pretty much it. You'd load this again with 8 more weights, and you get 8 sets of data for your weight, your deflection, and the values of the 3 strains on the 3 channels. And using this data, you should be able to calculate the Young's modulus and other properties. Thank you.